GPPs. I've already said it. GPPs are my favorite part of group policy. Before we had GPPs, people had to spend an inordinate amount of time crafting custom EDM files way back in the day. And whereas that special language Microsoft used to craft those custom or create those custom EDM files was kind of cool, it was really a pain in the neck. And the problem also with group policy was always designed to be kind of an enforcement mechanism. It was intended for you to set a policy. I mean, that's why it's called a policy. And then that policy then is completely enforced on machines. In most cases with group policy, the whole point behind it was that if a user goes about changing that setting to something else, well, when the group policy refresh interval kicks in, group policy will see, well, wait a minute, that's not to our baseline specification, and in many cases revert that setting back to what's in the group policy object. Now, in many circumstances, that's great because it ensures you always have a stable and known configuration on machines. But every so often, you have need not necessarily to enforce a setting, but just to create an initial state, an initial configuration that gives a person a comfortable starting point to begin their work, but then allows them to go about reconfiguring their settings if they should so choose. Well, group policy preferences was designed initially to accomplish that task. The preferences part of group policy preference is essentially that. It's designed to provide a preference that you, the admin, provide for a person, but still allow an individual to go about changing it if that's not their preference. And so here in this module, we have what are just two different tasks we have to talk about that I'm going to break apart into a bunch of different subtasks because I want to explore deeply the different kinds of group policy preference items that exist. I strongly suggest that you spend some time, some good quality time in those group policy preference settings, because it's the preference settings that can provide most of the functionality that you would normally require in some kind of logon script. I mean, if you think about a logon script, you use logon scripts to do things like map printers, map network drives, maybe configure registry settings and control panel items like environment variables, maybe even configure Internet Explorer settings in certain circumstances, or copy files and folders to a machine, even copying shortcuts to machines in some situations as well. So those logon scripts and the code, the VB script, the batch, or the PowerShell code you would normally use in a logon script can be much easier managed here with the use of a group policy preference or many group policy preferences. Now, the really cool part about preferences also is that when you create them, when you identify and create a preference for one reason or another, there is the ability to further target that preference, the individual preference, down to machines or users based off of a fairly rich set of different characteristics that you can define. This item level targeting is done on the individual item. That's why it's called item level targeting. So you could potentially create a giant GPP GPO with a bunch of different settings that are only configured when that machine or that user meets certain characteristics. In many situations, item level targeting is awesome for ensuring, for example, is the machine a laptop before you ever go about deploying any VPN settings? Does the machine contain an application before you go about reconfiguring that application's registry settings in HKeyCurrent user? So item level targeting is a component of GPPs that you'll find yourself using quite a bit. And as you'll see here in just a minute, as we work through just what these GPPs are, the GPPs themselves provide you a way to either enforce a setting or enforce a preference that the user could then change at some point in the future.